Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
That champion of other people's freedom, President Barack Obama, whose regime is currently gunning down its own people, especially if they're black, ran for office with a pledge to shut down Guantanamo Bay, the United States' own Gulag in an occupied corner of Cuba. 6 years on, it's still there and being expanded at great public expense.
Widespread torture, physical and psychological force-feeding, a legal black hole. Gitmo is a spot which will not out. For the land of the free, home of the brave. For Obama, it will be yet another sign of a presidency which sank in disgrace.
Shaker Aamer is the last British hostage held by our closest ally in the cages of Guantanamo, even though the British government has demanded his release and consecutive US governments have conceded that he has no case to answer. And yet, 12 years and 9 months later, he's still there. We're joined today by two remarkable campaigners fighting for him to come home before he dies at the hands of President Obama. Joanne Maclnnes and Andy Worthington, welcome to the Sputnik. But before I talk to you, let's see what happened when Gayatri talked to some rather important members of the public outside Parliament this week.
So outrageous that Shaker Aamer has been in Guantanamo Bay for over 12 years without charge or trial. That is completely against the principles of justice. Even George Bush cleared Shaker for release, yet the British government and the American government today have failed to get him freed.
In his testimony, he spoke long and passionately about how he was locked in rooms in the Middle East with people from MI5, if not beating him over the head with baseball bats themselves, but witnessing it and writing it down and making certain that, that he was severely tortured.
I suspect that the real reason he hasn't been released is because the British and American authorities are afraid that if he does get free, he'll reveal the high-level collusion of the British security services with various, unknown things that they don't want the world to know.
So there is a complicity in the secret services of the United Kingdom, which they do not want him to be able to speak about when he's free. And believe you me, he will. Yeah, I've read this guy's letter. You only have to read the letter to know he's got the heart of a lion.
Well done you for the star power you assembled there on that protest. We'll come to the campaign in a minute, but first of all, tell the viewers, what exactly did Shaker Aamer do to deserve all of this?
Well, he was in Afghanistan when the United States was rounding people up to put in Guantanamo. So, like many of the people who were in Afghanistan, he says he was there for humanitarian aid. The United States has not presented anything that looks like evidence to suggest that that's not the case. We launched this on Monday, the 24th of November, the 13th anniversary of when he was apparently captured by bounty hunters, and he ended up being handed around a bit and was then sold on to the United States, who shipped him with all these other people to Guantanamo, where they said to the world brazenly, these people are the worst of the worst, but actually behind the scenes they had no idea who they'd mostly bought.
No, it's amazing that even George Bush cleared him for release, but he's still here in Guantanamo 6 years into Barack Obama's presidency. How does that happen?
Well, that, of course, is the key question, George. Why is that the case? He was approved for release out of the prison, as you say, by a military review board under President Bush. Or actually, he was told that they didn't want to hold him. There isn't paperwork for that. But there are the documents under President Obama, who had a comprehensive review of all the prisoners he'd inherited from George W. Bush, in which he is one of the prisoners that they don't want to carry on holding. So he's still there. Now, in the majority of the cases of prisoners, you know, Barack Obama's been up in a battle against Congress. Congress has raised all kinds of obstacles to the release of prisoners, generally saying to him, we don't trust the kind of home countries that these guys are from. We don't think you should be sending them back. And throughout all of this, George, you know, they can't make a case about the United Kingdom being a dangerous country to send somebody back to. Clearly, their closest ally would be able to monitor Shaker Aamer should that be the case. So it's inexplicable. There must be some reason, some other reason.
Joanne, I said in the introduction that the British government was demanding his release, but they can't be demanding it very loudly or very forcefully, because David Cameron would just need to pick up the phone and say,
Get on the phone, bring him home. It just why not? And if you write to the Foreign Office, they say, oh, he's cleared for release, we're doing everything we can. But how can that be possible? How can it be possible?
It's self-evidently not true, because Britain is the so-called closest ally. If it really was damaging relations between Britain and the United States, the US would send him back. If he's been cleared for release, he's one guy. He would be being sent to a country, as Andy says, where he would certainly be monitored 24/7. So what does the local member of parliament tell you? How hard are they trying?
Well, my local member of parliament is Andy Slaughter, and he stood with our giant inflatable that we had made for our campaign called We Stand with Shaker. So he's actually been quite proactive.
What about Shaker's MP?
Jane Ellison. Well, she's a minister, so her line is that she can't, as a minister, stand.
Yeah, I mean, she was, you know, she was making representations on Shaker's behalf, and then she's now been co-opted into the government, so that's kind of removed the ability to do that. But I think, George, it's at the highest level. I mean, really, this is something for David Cameron to deal with, and the excuses. When you look at it, obviously we know Shaker Aamer is an eloquent man who knows a lot about things that have happened.
What's his background? What was he?
He came to Britain in the 90s. He's got a British wife, British kids. I believe that he was working on translation stuff, legal documents. He's always been somebody that people have said went out of his way to help other people. You know, that's why he was in Afghanistan. But he knows a lot, so we understand that it would be embarrassing for him to be released. But both the British and the American governments have proved very adept over all these years of the war on terror of not being held accountable in any courtroom for what they've been doing. So it's a question of embarrassment.
Well, they've made judicious use of hush money to a variety of people around the world.
In this country, in the States, President Obama has made sure that no alleged torture victim has got anywhere near a courtroom. But you know, with Shaker Aamer, we end up hitting this brick wall where they bounce it from one side to another. The British are particularly good at bouncing it back and saying, this is the Americans' problem. Now, what we think, and I don't think this is very clear publicly, but what's been discussed over the years, and Shaker spoke about it years ago, if he could be sent back to Saudi Arabia, which is what it appears the United States wants to do, then he wouldn't be able to talk. Now, you know, it may very well be, George, that the United Kingdom government would be quite happy for that to happen, should that be possible. But the thing that I think we have an obligation to do in Britain is to say, you can't do that.
No, he was a British resident. He has a British wife and British children. How are they standing up to 12 years, 9 months?
Apparently not so well. They don't get involved very much with the campaign. They're trying to live their lives. But his youngest child he's never met. His youngest child was born on the day that Shaker was sent to Guantanamo.
So tell us about this campaign.
We've got this for now, which I'll show you. This is our We Stand with Shaker campaign. And what we're asking, we've asked all sorts of MPs, George, and many others representing all the parties to stand with this inflatable for We Stand with Shaker campaign.
I've done it already.
Yeah, you've done it. We've got a great picture, and we've tweeted you, and that went well. So we're tweeting, we're putting these pictures on Facebook.
Lawyers and journalists and actors and comedians, people who have a profile, who are prepared to stand up.
I'd say go light on the MPs and heavier on
Well, with the election coming up, we're really urging people, and
Yes,
we're
of
going
course.
to take pictures of candidates who are running. So make it, you know, have you stood with Shaker?
So considering he's been incarcerated for 12 years under severe torture, are people surprised to see him smiling on a giant inflatable?
Yeah, the reason he smiles is because in his 2 pictures, is there just 2 since he's been in Guantanamo?
Yeah.
He smiles in both of them for the sake of his children and family. He doesn't want to look, you know, I suppose he's got a very
And I think
big
I
smile.
think it shows his resilience as well. I mean, this is a man who has an
Well,
enormous-
Roger Waters described him as having the heart of a lion,
Yeah.
which may be the clue to why he's not yet back.
But you know, we shouldn't underestimate also that, you know, that he's very ill in a lot of ways. His lawyers managed to get a judge last year to order the government to allow an independent medical expert to examine him. And, you know, he has a list of physical and mental ailments.
Is he alone? Is he in solitary?
Yeah, as far as I understand, George, he spends most of his time in solitary. They don't allow out prisoners like Shaker, who, when they're allowed to mix with the other well-behaved prisoners, start agitating for the prisoners' rights. He's not the only one. He's certainly the most high-profile one. But
Well,
over
there
the
have
years,
been 790 or so inmates. There are now, what,
142 now.
142, 73 of which the US government has said they don't wish to hold anymore.
Yeah.
One of whom is Shaker.
Yeah.
So what's the prospects? What's your realistic expectation? And how can viewers of Sputnik help your campaign?
Well, certainly, you know, come and visit our website and follow the links that we have to write to our leaders in the UK, to write to the American government. Send in photos in support of us holding up signs that say, "I stand with Shaker" or "We stand with Shaker," and let's try and build this up into a very, very big public campaign. Those are the things that we can do. I think we need to take heart in some ways, because President Obama made this bold promise, then failed to keep it, that he was going to close Guantanamo within a year. He's now got 2 years left, and he knows that his legacy, you know, is going to be tainted by a failed promise. There are clearly people in his administration who don't care about Guantanamo. There are other people in his administration who say we need to deal with this, for the reasons that he always says when he talks about it publicly, that it's dangerous for the United States as well as shameful. So he's been releasing quite a few prisoners at the moment, George. And one of the things that was noticeable is that a Yemeni and a Tunisian who couldn't be returned home, negotiations took place. They found a new home for these guys in a European country, Slovakia. That rather sharpens the sense of injustice about Shaker Aamer's case. That it really, if prisoners are going to be found new homes in European countries, what about the far easier job of the British government sending a plane, David Cameron sending a plane to Guantanamo and saying, while you're at it, let's have our guy back.
Then let's have him back for his birthday, December 21st.
Yes, let's do
That's
that.
That might be a tall order, but certainly in an election year,
Yeah.
we really got to push hard.
We've got to push. We've got to do it. We need everybody's support for this.
Well, you got Roger Waters of Pink Floyd. That's some doing. You must be great campaigners, I must say. Coming up after the break, Tony Blair. Welcome back to Sputnik. Tony Blair, who some say is responsible for the death and mutilation of more children than any British ruler in history, and that would be saying something, was last week on International Children's Day given a Global Legacy Award by the Save the Children charity. Yes, you heard that right.
As many of you know, we are making the major crowd-funded documentary, The Killing of Tony Blair. Drawing a finishing line, however, is proving difficult for the movie, because for his critics, Blair is a gift which keeps on giving.
The award may well ruin the once widely admired Save the Children Fund. Their staff around the world are in open revolt, and 100,000 people, and rising, have signed the petition demanding the rescinding of the award, and many are now calling for the sacking of the man many feel must be responsible for this grotesque blunder. Former Blair advisor, now one of the chiefs of Save the Children, Justin Forsyth, to discuss how we can keep up with the crimes and misdemeanors of Tony Blair. We're joined by James Randolph, associate producer of the film, The Killing of Tony Blair. James, thanks for coming on board. We'll talk about Blair and the film in a minute. But This is a Gerald Ratner moment for Save the Children. Gerald Ratner, who once owned a chain of downmarket jewellers, by admitting in public on film that what he was selling was he ruined his entire business. And it's no more, it's an ex-jeweller. Why would Save the Children Fund, widely admired with royal patronage, Princess Anne, multi-million pound organisation, take such a terrifying risk as honouring Tony Blair?
It beggars belief, George. This is an absolute and utterly crazy moment for an organisation as respected as Save the Children. Looking closely at the makeup of their board and of their trustees, it doesn't really take a lot of detective work to work it out.
No, you don't need to be Sherlock Holmes. Justin Forsyth is one, and Jonathan Powell is on the management board. I could see why they'd want to honour Blair with Chilcot coming up. But they're the very people who must have known how controversial such a move would be. How did they persuade the others to go along with it?
Well, there's two ways of looking at this. Blair has the sword of Damocles with Chilcot hanging over him. He knows that. He's read the report. He knows what sort of damage that he's in for. It could be that he's calling in favours with friends. It really could be just as simple as that. He's had the GQ magazine earlier this year nominate
Humanitarian of the year.
It's preposterous, absolutely preposterous.
You couldn't make this stuff up.
No.
And that, again, was a bit incestuous, wasn't it? Because Alistair Campbell, his chief spin doctor, had been editing GQ.
He'd been their star writer, their star interviewer. Everyone that has any associations with GQ goes through Alistair Campbell. Alistair Campbell conveniently has his best friend as a humanitarian of the year, which is just absolutely ridiculous. I mean,
but these people are supposed to be wizards on the old spin doctoring. This has actually been a disaster for Blair, because by being given this award and the backlash being so shattering, potentially, I'm not joking, potentially terminal for Save the Children. Sorry for all the people who work there and all the good work that they've done, but this is possibly terminal. And if that happens, that's another crime that will be added to Blair's charge sheet.
Well, Blair has pulled in every favour he can. 4 of the 8 directors, the senior management team of Save the Children, are former government / New Labour / Blair acquaintances and friends. As you say, Jonathan Powell, his former chief of staff, is on the board of trustees. To all intents and purposes, this is a New Labour takeover of a much respected, long established organisation which they've compromised.
Moving on from the Save the Children, which is only the latest of many scandals erupting around Blair, the one a couple of weeks ago seems to me potentially one of the most damaging in the post-prime ministerial era. It was revealed in the Sunday Times. Not only was he receiving more than £40,000 a month as a retainer from a Saudi Arabian oil company with a 2% commission rate, landing him on one deal alone, potentially £20 million in commission, but that the contract said that almost to the point of swearing upon death, no one must ever know that I, Tony Blair, am working for you, Mr. Saudi Arabian oil company, son of the Saudi king. This is in the film that we're all making together, but it illustrates the point Gayatri made, that it's difficult to keep up with all this. Yeah. I mean, we could have finished the film a month ago and missed the Sunday Times and the Save the Children scandal. If we finish it now, we might miss another few.
Yeah, this is like the Bayer tapestry. It just keeps going on and on and on, and it's difficult to know where to have a cut-off point, because well, Blair keeps digging himself holes. He's obviously incurred the wrath of Mr. Murdoch, who Sunday Times broke this, and I think it was in the Australia as well, another Murdoch paper.
I wonder what Mr. Murdoch has against Mr. Blair. Perhaps we shouldn't stray into personal matters. Keep that under the bedclothes. But he is in seriously big trouble. Let's talk about Chilcot. Chilcot has laboured in this vineyard now for how many years? How long have they been inquiring?
It's been
7
going
years?
on for since, well, yes, it's cost in the region of 13, 14 million pounds. It's been going on far too long. It's been held over and held over and held over for political considerations rather than anything of open governance. I think it's 7 years.
But it can't be held over any longer because otherwise they won't be able to release it before the election. And that would be an even bigger scandal.
Yeah.
They can't release it in the weeks, even months, just before the election. That seems to me to indicate a release of before Christmas. How bad do you think it's going to be?
Well, bearing in mind that Blair is aware of the contents, the timing of these awards, it does look suspect. Just with an impartial eye, it looks suspect. He's got the Serious Fraud Office investigation, the scandal over that, which has been sidelined into the Al Yamamah oil deal, which throws up the questions over the Saudi contract and the need for absolute discretion, security and secrecy that he's demanded within his contract. You have to look at the potential for an explosion for New Labour at the election.
Not just Blair, of course. I mean, Jack Straw unexpectedly announced he was standing down.
Yeah.
I understand he's quite firmly in the frame for severe criticism, even condemnation. I mean, let's face it, I don't want Labour to lose the election, but this was a Labour crime. This was a Labour war, which has never been atoned for. I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? They're still running around with Campbell and Blair.
Well, Campbell, Blair, and let's not forget Miliband, another charitable worker on £300,000 a year in New York City, which is ideally out of the damage zone as far as Blair and Straw and the other culpable parties are concerned. But we've really got to look at from 10 years ago. This is a clear view, a clear break, and Miliband hasn't made that break. He will have to do so if he's to win back any public confidence in New Labour as a result of the Chilcot report, which, you know, as you say, it really should be out before Christmas with a view to the political considerations of the general election, which we know is going to take place in 2015.
Now, you're the producer of the film. James is toiling away in the vineyard of the Blair doc. How's it going? When's it coming out?
Well, as we discussed earlier on, there seems to be no end to all the gifts that Tony Blair is giving us. Actually, more of a headache to our team. But we are wrapping up, and we are expecting the release of the film very soon, in 2015, in the early months of 2015, to give it some time prior to the general elections.
James, what have been I mean, without giving away the contents, has any of the work you've done surprised you?
The level of Blair's deceit, the level of his betrayal of the Labour Party and its values and its history.
And the level of the avarice. Will Self says in the film, I'll mimic him, I am staggered at the avarice shown by Tony Blair. That's the bit that shocked me, because I saw all the rest. I saw him betraying the Labour Party, killing it. I saw him killing the Afghans and the Iraqis. What I didn't see, and no one really has seen until this film comes out, is the level of the avarice. James, thanks very much for joining us on board the Sputnik. And get this film out quickly, won't you? And now it's your turn to tell us what you think through the portals of social media. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Well, you see, many people don't understand why Shaker Aamer is still in Guantanamo Bay, but I'm sure this interview will have enlightened most. Shifran Edros, however, makes the point that if he wasn't a terrorist before, he sure has a reason now. Anyone would hate the US for doing this.
Quite so. It's entirely counterproductive. It's destroyed their reputation. If they had a reputation left to defend, they can no longer defend it. It has radicalized a whole generation of Muslims around the world. It's one of the factors which have radicalized them. They go looking for people to ban or proscribe, but actually the knowledge that hundreds of Muslims have been locked up for 12 years and more, That would make anybody radical.
Yeah. Well, on Tony Blair, well, social media has been full with outrage, of course. So I'm just picking up a number of them. Alan Swanson says, proves money can buy you anything. And West Stand Jim says, unbelievable. Surely it must rank as one of the biggest blunders in PR history.
Yeah, it's a Ratner moment. I cannot think of any non-government organization, any organization dependent on the public's goodwill that has ever made a bigger mistake than Save the Children have made in this case.
Well, that's all that we have for this week.
Which, alas, means that's the end of the show.
Please keep in touch with us on Twitter, RT_Sputnik, and on Facebook, you can like us on Sputnik on Russia Today. It's goodbye from me, Gayatri.
And from me, George Galloway. It's been marvellous.